Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Entire country.
Hey guys. Why did Germany actually fall or fail at Normandy? Preemptive like Knowledgia. Great channel. My name's Connor if you're new. Let's learn, shall we? Why did they fail at Normandy? They thought it was coming over Calais with pretty ingenious Allied, I think mainly British deception tactics. And they didn't extend the Atlantic Wall. I don't know. I really... let's learn, shall we? My name's Connor if you're new. All the links, whatever I haven't said in the intro that I usually say, that. Let's go.
The Battle of Normandy. D-Day. The liberation of France. How did Germany fail so catastrophically? While the Allies suffered around 10,000 casualties as a result of the beach stormings at Normandy, France, on June 6, 1944, the Germans lost an entire country. France was freed from the withering German grasp as the Third Reich froze like a deer in the headlights on an old country road. But the headlights came from more than one vehicle. There was more than one reason why Germany failed, and really, everything just went as wrong could be. One of the main factors that people generally point to as the reason why the Germans failed is the fact that Hitler himself had opted to hold all of the puppet strings of the Third Reich's military. This alone was problematic for multiple reasons. For one, it was the Führer's belief that the Allies were going to attack France, but they wouldn't be in Normandy. He was firmly convinced that another location, such as Calais, would house the Allied invaders. This led...
Guys, do you think that, well, Hitler was either just crazy and controlling and didn't want other people to make military decisions for him, regardless of his success through the Ardennes, because that was sort of, if not only his idea, he had a big role in deciding to blitzkrieg through the Ardennes and surround the French and British Allied troops, eventually coming to the evacuation at Dunkirk. And do you think that his ego just got really high, his hubris, that like, look at like what Germany couldn't do in World War I, it was my idea. Guys, how, I'm not positive how much it was his idea that made it successful in bringing down France and forcing the evacuation of Dunkirk. But I think it was partially his idea. And so do you think that just, he's like, oh my God, look at that, I'm a genius. I just made France fall, which, to be fair, that was pretty darn good, having France fall that quickly when you couldn't do the same thing in World War I. But did that attribute to his thinking that, like, he needs to control everything?
Locations such as Calais would house the Allied invaders. This led to the unavailability of the proper defense forces at Normandy when D-Day came, because no one could change Hitler's mind about the location of an impending attack. Furthermore, as the Allied boots hit the Normandy sands, Hitler was asleep. The Führer had unusual sleeping habits, and not unusually, having stayed awake late into the night and sleeping through the early part of the day, he was in deep slumber as news began to reach German ears of the attack. The early confusion around what was happening caused a hesitation to wake the snoozing tyrant, despite the fact that command of the armed forces remained in his hands. And to make matters worse, Hitler awaking still failed to solve any problems. He continued to believe an attack was coming elsewhere. Normandy had to be a diversion. It was a tactic to pull German troops away from the real target, wherever that may be. Unwilling to fall for such a deception, it wasn't until sometime into the afternoon that the Fuhrer finally allowed a counterattack by the German panzer divisions, far too late to save the day. But Hitler wasn't the only military leader who fumbled the ball during the D-Day reaction. Prior to the actual attack, Field Marshals Erwin Rommel and Gerd von Rundstedt were duking it out over how to prepare for the imminent Allied assault. Rommel wanted to essentially line the coasts with the panzer...
Sorry, I love that name, Rundstedt. Von Rundstedt.
Allied assault. Rommel wanted to essentially line the coasts with the panzer divisions to stop a landing as it happened. Meanwhile, Rundstedt was sure that the proper strategy was to organize the divisions into a single formation further inland, where they could put an end to the Allied advance all at once.
I was just about to kind of ask that question, which I guess it was just answered for me. But if you're kind of, best, most obvious route of invading France from the UK was across Calais, which would make you think it's probably not that obvious because they're going to know it's obvious and probably pick somewhere else. But of course, picking somewhere else means you have more sea to cross. It's going to be harder to keep those lines intact. Not that the English Channel is huge, but certainly this is 3 or 4 times further away than right here. But just kind of, all right, you can attack over here if you want, but just having so that you don't have to guard the whole thing, just make sure the bulk of your forces are ready if there is a successful invasion to be able to push back. I don't know what I'm saying right now.
When a final conclusion was reached between the two, it created a rather weakened situation, leading to the already sparse resource of troops being split up even further. 4 panzer divisions were formed into the type of centralized reserve wanted by Rundstedt, whilst the other 6 were split evenly between Army Group B and Army Group G to deploy wherever they so pleased, such as along the water lines as Rommel wished. And when D-Day began, the Fuhrer wasn't the only leader unavailable. Rommel had left his men to go home for his wife's birthday celebrations, for example, which proved particularly problematic when General Erich Marx wanted to move the 21st Panzer Division to the beaches to face the Allies. He needed Rommel's permission to do so, given that the 21st Panzers were under Rommel's authority in Army Group B. With the Field Marshal away, Marx had to engage in a string of radio interactions with Rommel's Chief of Staff, Colonel Hans Speidel, before he could secure approval and move the 21st Division. By the time this process was finished, the morning was already over, and Marx's men were slow to reach the coastline, losing men and crucial equipment along the trek as they marched through Allied fire.
Question. Do you guys think that the staggering success that the Germans had in the beginning of the World War II in taking over mainland Europe, not before Operation Barbarossa, invasion of the Soviet Union, that maybe it was too successful, that it led them to think that they didn't have to make any command structure changes to avoid something like this? It is almost like you're being led into a false sense of security that the inability for people to work on the fly might have worked before, but now that you're entering this scenario, that backfired. So do you think that the insane amount of success that the Germans had might have caused them not to make changes before bigger tests came, like Normandy or the invasion of Russia, where I think they had a similar issue with just telling people to stay there and just listen to Adolf.
Fire. Even equipment along the trek as they marched through Allied fire. Even even amongst the soldiers and military leaders who were fighting on the front line, the general understanding of what was going on was quite muddled. Some of the commanders at the front were taking in and giving out false information concerning the direction of the battle, with a portion of the Germans falsely believing that they had somehow turned the tide in their own favor. No one really knew what was happening, and thus the reactions, where they even existed, were generally bungled. The troops themselves were scarcely capable either way, as many of the Third Reich's forces were fighting on other fronts, and those in Normandy were a combination of underarmed and ill-prepared Wehrmacht soldiers and Eastern European conscripts captured earlier on in the war. These were far from Germany's best. There was a great deal of confusion, miscalculations, and misunderstandings even before the storming of the beaches. The Germans didn't yet believe that the Allies could pull off such a large-scale attack with the number of troops and equipment they did in fact utilize, because without a port, there just seemed to be no possibility. But that's the catch of all of it. The Allies were remarkable at convincing the Germans to regard as true the exact opposite of the real truth. The deception skills of the Allied powers can be seen in the way that they disrupted German communications. Their schemes to seize the spies and send back double agents, or even the facts that they alone were able to calculate a break in the hazardous weather of Normandy's June 6th skies to execute their landing in an environment no one believed possible. But the real Allied capabilities as illusionists can be summed up into two words: a name: Operation Fortitude. There was a name for the Allied conspiracy, and it was Operation Fortitude. The ultimate goal of the plot was to convince the Third Reich that the anticipated Allied attack on European soil would come, but it wouldn't come to Normandy. And that's exactly what Hitler believed. The deception began the year prior to the actual assault, and it involved the development of an entirely fake armed force. At the time of the birth of Operation Fortitude, within the umbrella of Operation Bodyguard, the Germans had already been under the impression that the most logical point of invasion for the Allies would be at Pas-de-Calais, and the
I've seen videos where of the deception tactics prior to the invasion of Normandy. That there were some little touches that really wow, they're thinking is that they had to blow up like tanks and trucks that you can't tell from an aerial perspective that they're fake, and they even made tracks in the dirt that led up to those inflatable things that obviously the inflatable things couldn't make, but just made it look more believable. And I thought that was genius.
Allied military leaders knew this. No one even had a logical point of invasion for the Allies would be at Pas-de-Calais, and the Allied military leaders knew this. No one even had to convince the Germans of such an idea. The thought only needed to be solidified. At the start of 1944...
Hold on. So, not Corsica. What? That's Sicily. Sardinia? Corsica? Which is this? Sardinia? So, the landings in Italy had already happened prior to the invasion of Normandy. I guess that makes sense. I wasn't really sure of that.
Sub-up needed to be solidified. At the start of 1944, Sub-Operation Quicksilver was launched, with the announcement that now famous and then widely respected U.S. senior officer George S. Patton will be taking command of the 1st U.S. Army Group, shortened to FUSAG. The catch here was that the FUSAG wasn't real. Its men were decoys, its tanks and planes were fake, and much of its equipment was no more than inflatable toys. To make the whole ordeal even more convincing, the Allies feigned obliviousness in allowing the Germans to take photographs as they flew over the decoys of their made-up army.
I love that little dance they must have had to play to be like, how do we let them take the pictures but aren't so obviously not trying to intercept them that it's believable? And that must have been really interesting how you choreograph that.
Still pushing to ensure full believability, misleading radio transmissions were intentionally leaked to the Germans. At the same time, the aforementioned double agents fed the Fuhrer and his military leaders the same lies while holding their utmost trust.
Wait a second, the body that they let wash up with plans.
All of this played perfectly into Hitler's hitherto beliefs and right into the Allied hands. Even if the Germans had caught the double agents in their lies, recognized the Fusag decoys, and prepared more steadily for a possible attack on Normandy's beaches, there's no guarantee that D-Day still would not have been a failure for the Third Reich. The war was nearing its end, and the dominance of the new regime and military was on a decline already. The Allies simply had more powerful troops, and more of them. The Germans were fighting on more than one front, and they weren't anticipating an immensely large-scale incursion from the French coast. And even though they did expect something, they had an entire coastline to defend if they wanted to cover all their weak points. Roughly 2,000 miles worth of beaches were to be guarded by a scarcely manned and supplied handful of panzer divisions. Meanwhile, the Allies could concentrate all of their utilized troops on one single attack area of their choosing. The Allied side was furthermore employing force by land, sea, and air, but the Germans had no air or naval power to behold. They had men with boots on the ground, and nothing more. A lack of falsehood as to where the attack was going to happen had no bearing on the unanticipated timing, nor would it have kept Hitler from sleeping in late while being the key to unlocking his military's counterattack. It wouldn't have stopped Rommel from going home either, nor any of the other little details that altogether had gone terribly wrong for Germany. The truth is, the Germans failed at Normandy because they were incapable of finishing the war they'd started. By the time of D-Day, they were spread too thin and too deep in poor decisions to climb their way out of the bunker that would one day soon see their ultimate demise.
Why invade Russia? I get it, they needed oil, but if you weren't on a offensive, Russia clearly was not even ready for the initial German invasion of the Soviets. They weren't ready for the invasion, and so there wasn't a chance that the Soviets were going to suddenly just be like, all right, we're attacking Germany. And I understand you need oil, but you're not going to be on any more offensive missions. And so you can focus all of your oil reserves and whatnot on defensive stuff. And then I understand this is hindsight, but I always wonder, and I've seen some videos on this, like Tick, the YouTube channel Tick had a great video on it explaining why, basically, Germany had no shot of winning. But the only way I can think maybe is if they just did not invade the Soviets and just solidify what they had, made deals with people who might have had more oil, and just kind of dare the British and so you can take the Soviets out of the equation. They're not attacking you. And it's going to be very difficult for the British and Americans to get the Soviets into committing to invade from the east, since they just didn't seem ready at all for the invasion defensively. And so why would they be ready for an offensive Even if they had the manpower, just like it just seems like in so many different areas where you'd be like, what if they did this? What if they did this? They still seem to run into a checkmate. But that's the only way I can think of it, is solidifying your control. It's kind of similar to Napoleon as well. Obviously the great similarity in the downfall of the French and the Napoleonic Wars, Germans in World War II, was stretching yourself so deep in trying to conquer Russia, even if both seem to destroy Russia in the initial attack. It's like, okay, what now? Well, now your supplies are extremely thin, and what are you gonna do? So I'm not as confident in saying Napoleon should not have invaded Russia as I am with the Germans not invading Russia, and I'm not. You guys can definitely tell me if I'm wrong here. I would welcome it. I would love to hear it. But I'm just trying to think of any scenario where Germany wins World War II. And it's very difficult, but this is the best sort of guess I have right now. And there might be things I'm not thinking of that just wouldn't work. Very interesting. Love Knowledge, great channel. Hope you guys are all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. And hopefully I'll see you next video. Bye, guys.